Chapter 12. Looking for the Truth. I stood looking at the closed door and listened as Andrea took the lift down to the ground floor. I tried to decide what to do. I knew Andrea was tired of the doppelganger story, and so was I. And I knew she wanted me to spend more time with her and Cotty, and so did I. But I needed to know why this was happening to me. After a few minutes, I put my coat back on and walked round to Gheorghe Utsa and met the housekeeper again. This time, I had to do the talking. I asked lots of questions. Was there a family called Sabo in any of the flats? No. Had there ever been a family called Sabo in the time she had been housekeeper? No. Were there any old people living in the building? Only Mrs. Kovac on the second floor, who was probably in her 70s. I decided to try her. She was a very nice old lady, but she had only moved into the flat in 1979, when her husband had died, so she could be closer to her daughter and family who lived nearby. After that, I walked round to 7 Felka Utsa and found the housekeeper. I asked her the same questions, and I was very happy when she told me that there was a Sabo family on the 3rd floor. I took the lift up and found the flat. The door was answered by a big man wearing a dirty vest. "Mr. Sabo?" I asked, feeling rather unsure of myself. "Who wants to know?" he answered, looking angry. "I'm, trying to find part of my wife's family called Sabo," I said, thinking quickly. "I, want to know if you can help me." "What do you want to know?" he asked in an ugly voice. "Did your family live in this flat at the end of the war?" I asked. "It's none of your business," he replied, starting to shut the door. "Oh, please, Mr. Sabo," I said. "I've come a long way, and it's very important for me to find out." "Look," said Mr. Sabo. "How do I know you're not the police, or a detective or something?" "Mr. Sabo, look at me," I replied. "I'm English. I work with computers. I only need to know if your family lived here during the war." He seemed to become a little softer. "No. My parents moved here after the revolution in 1956, he said. "They're dead now. I was born here in 1958. Okay?" "Oh, I see," I answered. "Thank you so much for your time." What a horrible man, I thought, as I walked back to the lift. And what's more, not the right man. I went back down to the housekeeper. "Not the right Sobos, I'm afraid," I said when she came to the door. "Oh dear," said the lady. "I'm sorry, but we haven't got any more." "But are there any old people?" I asked. "Or are there any families who have lived here for a very long time?" "Yes," she answered. "There is one person. Old Mrs. Fisher on the 4th floor. She's been here for ages." "Oh, wonderful," I replied with a smile. "Thank you." I got back into the lift and went up to the 4th floor and found the right flat. I had to ring the bell again and again before the old lady opened the door. She couldn't hear very well. But she let me into her small kitchen and offered me a cup of coffee. "Mrs. Fisher, how long have you lived here in Velké Utsa?" I had to repeat each question about 3 times before she understood what I said, because of my Hungarian and her hearing problems.
"Since 1937, my dear," she replied. "I moved into this flat as a young wife with my new husband, Pal. He died 5 years ago."
"I'm sorry," I said. "Did you live here during the war?"
"Yes, we did," she answered. "Well, I did. My husband was away fighting most of the time."
"Were you here in 1945, when the Russians got the Germans out of Pest?" I asked.
"Yes, I most certainly was,"
Mrs. Fisher replied.
"We didn't know who were worse, the Germans or the Russians."
"And can you remember any of the other people who lived in this building then?" I continued.
"Well, some of them," she said. "Lots of people were killed."
Here she seemed to lose herself, thinking about those bad days again. "Perhaps you remember a family called Sobo?" I asked. She looked at me with a very strange face. I thought she was going to say that she remembered nothing, when suddenly she said very quietly,
Poor János."
I looked at the old lady and waited.
"Would you like some more coffee or a glass of juice, perhaps?" she said, standing up.
"No, that's fine, thank you, Mrs. Fisher," I said. "I'm sorry, but what were you saying about János Sobo a moment ago?" Again I waited.
"Oh, it was terrible," she said. "We were all so sorry for him. It was such a bad thing to happen. And right on the day when the fighting ended here in Pest."
She stopped again. I waited, thoughts running through my head.
"He had looked after his family all through the war," she said. "His health was not very good, and so he didn't go away to fight. Then, in 1943, his wife had a baby. Oh, a sweet little girl. They were so happy."
I smiled, thinking of my Koti.
"His wife used to go and help in a shop, in a cellar," she continued. "Then, on that day—"
"But where was the cellar shop?" I asked quickly.
"Oh, not far," she replied. "Just round the corner, in Velké Utsa."
I looked at her very hard. I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
"And on that day, the day when the fighting stopped, in January 1945,
went on the old lady,
János was down in the courtyard, the small outdoor area where children played. He was talking to a few of us neighbours. We knew the fighting was nearly over. You could just hear a few guns from outside, and sometimes a bomb coming in from the Russians. Suddenly, a man ran into our building, shouting for János, telling him to go to the Velké Utsa cellar shop quickly. Something had happened. He ran out immediately, and when he came back, He had changed completely.
Here she stopped again for a long time. "Can you tell me what had happened, Mrs. Fisher?" I asked quietly.
"Oh, it was too bad," she said, her eyes wet with crying. "It was such bad luck, so unfair after all that war. A Russian bomb hit the building above the cellar shop in Gergeutzer. It didn't explode, but it was heavy enough to destroy the cellar. And so that poor young woman and the baby were killed. So unfair."
I looked at the old lady, feeling both happy and sad. I had finally found out the truth from someone who had been there. "What happened to János after that?" I asked.
"Oh, the poor, poor man," said the old lady. "He was never the same again. He stopped wanting to live. In the end, he died fighting in the streets in 1956. We all thought he wanted to die. He had nothing left to live for."